Hello, everybody. It is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome. Welcome back to another video over here on That's Comical. And if you're watching and it happens to be a Wednesday, happy new comic book day. Well, I'm, of course, at Andy's place today. Andy, always great to have a great conversation with you.
Hey, Steve, I'm really looking forward to this one. Hi, everybody.
Yes, because today we're going to be doing another episode of Creator's Notes, where we take a look at a writer or an artist in the comic book / manga industry. And we've got a very interesting one today. Today we're going to be talking about one of mine and Andy's personal favorite writers / artists in the industry right now, just because of all the amazing thing that's happening. And that, of course, is Jeff Lemire. So, as always, if you enjoy this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and a comment. We'd love to talk to you guys. And if you have enjoyed this video or any of the other content over here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you're up to date with all of our latest content. So Andy, Jeff Lemire is a name that you and I, as comic book collectors and fans, have been talking about for a lot in recent years. And what is it about Jeff Lemire to you right now that makes him this name that is really becoming a household name amongst current comic book readers? Why is it, what makes him what he is right now?
So it feels like, and I mean, this almost feels like a non-point because it's what you want from any good comic book writer, but it's the creativity and, for me, the way he writes character. So both in his original series and original ideas where he's creating these new characters and these new universes, I think there's a level of creativity there, an underlying darkness and an introspection to the characters that's really gripping. And then on the other side of things, where he has stepped in to kind of work on traditional characters and stories that we are familiar with, when he goes in and does his own spin on characters, he takes that same lens to it. So I've really enjoyed watching him explore the inner workings of the characters he writes. And I'm ready to be along for the ride. I expect great things to continue moving forward, and I've just been really enjoying his stuff recently.
Right. I mean, for me personally, I didn't really think he was someone who had been around for a while, yet for some strange reason, when I got back into reading comics back in 2019, it was a name that I knew. Like, Jeff Lemire was a name that sounded very familiar to me, but I could never put my finger as to where I actually saw his name. But what was really interesting that I found out is, even though I currently know him now as a writer, I know that he's a very talented artist. He's got a very unique style to his work. And that's pretty much where I first realized that I heard his name, because before he was actually given the opportunity to start writing comic books, he actually had been doing a lot of artwork. And I know for a fact, and I don't know if you are aware of this, but I know you are a fan of the Max Bemis Moon Knight run. Do you by any chance have the last issue that Max Bemis wrote, issue number 200?
I do have a copy of that. Yes.
Yeah. Jeff Lemire drew that.
All right.
Yeah. He's a great artist, and I also didn't really know too much about his past work except for two specific projects that we'll obviously get into in just a bit. But he was very much part of the New 52 run from DC. He was given a crack at two specific titles. One, he actually was given the reins on the New 52 run of Constantine, and he only wrote the first 4 issues. And unfortunately, that was a title that got cut a little too quick. But he also wrote a large chunk of the New 52 Green Arrow series, which apparently must have been something that really got him into people's doors and into people's minds when it comes to comic book writing. But obviously, his two big runs were his run of Sweet Tooth, and later on into the later 2000s, 2010s, was his very well-known run of Gideon Falls. Now, unfortunately, those are two projects that I have not read. I know that Sweet Tooth is a very popular comic just because of the idea around it. I mean, so popular, in fact, that it actually became a streaming service live action series. It had a first season. I don't know if it's been renewed for a second, but it's a very unique story. And we recently did a Creator's Notes episode of W. Maxwell Prince. And when you take a look at some of the ideas that W. Maxwell Prince has, for me personally, you can very much find a connection between King of Nowhere and Sweet Tooth. The idea of a whole post-apocalyptic Earth where there are human animal hybrids and there are old human beings that don't want these creatures to become the predominant species of human on this planet, so they try to hunt them down. And it's sort of like a retelling of The Land Before Time, if you will, about a young hybrid boy trying to go on a quest to find the rest of his kind in a safe haven. Very much Land Before Time, if you ask me, just with not dinosaurs.
Yeah, and I will say, so those are, and it's great for his success to have had that. So similarly, I'm not familiar with Sweet Tooth, even though it's, I mean, obviously, I think his most successful. I think that's probably
one of his most
pretty
successful.
simple.
Yeah, that and Gideon Falls are pretty much his two big ones before everything that happened afterwards.
Yeah. And I will say, I know something about Jeff Lemire's writing is a lot of his original stuff, especially now, is very much leaning into stronger the horror genre, which is not as much my cup of tea. However, he's got a lot of stuff outside of that, and I do appreciate kind of the horror background that he brings to his other work, because I do think there's a psychological element to horror that, even though it's not my go-to, I can appreciate the artistry that goes into it.
Yeah, I mean, horror is definitely not something that I am truly the biggest fan of. And even though our co-member, and even though our fellow co-member of this team, Cami, tells me, Steve, you are a horror fan, whether you want to believe it or not. And it's true. I mean, I find more of my fandom of horror really in the pages of comics, just because of the fact that it's, the psychological mindset. It's not the jump scares. It's not the gross outs, though. Do I have some horror comics where there are gross outs? Yes. As a matter of fact, we're going to be talking about one of those specific titles today because Jeff Lemire is linked to it.
Yes.
So pretty much when it came to me starting to really focus on wanting to get into Jeff Lemire's writing, I was reading Matt Walsh's Image Comics, The Silver Coin. What I really like about The Silver Coin is the fact that he goes 5 issues, and before he gets to the 5th issue, which is the end of each story arc, he tries to team up with another writer for the purposes of writing individual stories. So he's already had some big names linked to him, like Chip Zdarsky, Stephanie Phillips, James Tynion in the 4th. And it was in the first bunch of stories where he actually tapped Jeff Lemire to do the 4th issue of The Silver Coin. And I will personally say that was one of the real standout issues of that arc.
It's a weird one
different.
Too. I mean, they're all different. That's its thing, but it definitely stood out even amongst the anthology format of Silver Coin, I thought.
Specifically because of the fact that it had a sci-fi element to it. It takes place in the far off future, because we saw the Silver Coin in the 70s, in the 80s, and even in current day, and then it went into like the year 2114.
Right.
So, and then it went into the past with the Salem witch trials, which is even crazier. But yeah, his issue, even though for me personally it wasn't the best issue, it stuck with me.
I agree,
because it just felt like something different.
Yeah, I agree. It also was not my favorite. Silver Coin gripped me again, while not a horror fan, just because of the imagination behind it. And while the story itself in that issue wasn't the one that resonated with me most, I did really, really appreciate that he came at it with a spin that was just so completely different from everybody else. And it expanded the mythos of the Silver Coin, which I think is another aspect of Jeff Lemire's world building that's important to highlight. And I think that's something that he brought to the table that was really welcome. I can tell, and the way he approaches horror, especially with this kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not universe. I mean, you could say that, but with the kind of multimedia approach he's trying to take to a shared horror story currently, I think it really points to the fact that he's got this mind that's about the world building, that's about the context, that's about providing the reader with things they can really sink their teeth into. And I think that issue of Silver Coin was his way of being like, yes, I'd love to participate in this anthology thing that is not solely my own, but if I'm going to do it, I'm going to bring something to the table. And so now that future silver coin story will always exist.
Yes.
As the silver
I
coin
mean, I
goes
think
on.
the best way to describe Jeff Lemire's writing is that he's very atmospheric. He
Yes.
really knows how to capture
Yes.
that moment, and he really gets you engrossed in the world that he's trying to build
think that's
for
right.
you. And it was after reading the Silver Coin issue number 4, which was when I was very excited in that very same year. We're talking 2021, where I was very excited to finally read my very first Jeff Lemire solo miniseries, and that was Dark Horse's Maze Book.
Mhm.
And what I really appreciated about that one was because I got to see his writing style in full force. I got to see his drawing style in full force. And Maze Book to me was something completely different from everything that I was reading at the time. The atmosphere, especially through his art, really
Yeah.
captures that atmosphere in a completely different way. It's so simple,
Mhm.
yet so complex, because the whole 5 issues, the artistry is like a ball of yarn
Yes.
unraveling. That's what I love so much about that story. And the story itself is something out of something like Neil Gaiman or
gripping.
Jim Henson would write. It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah, I think that's a really good comparison. Specifically the Jim Henson part. I think that's right, because it's an imaginative kind of setting, and it's an imaginative story with an underlying darkness. And granted, Jeff Lemire, the darkness is very, forward, but I think it's a human story with fantastic elements. So Maze Book is wonderful, and one of the ones that I did want to talk about. And I think it's a great story to show off his art and his writing, right? There's great teams of writers and artists, but there is something to be said for that unified vision. That way, the actor who's also the director, it's that kind of thing. And I think Maze Book, really, it felt like he was free to tell a story that he wanted to write, that I wouldn't have expected to be commercially successful in any way. That Maze Book really feels like a labor of love. It's mature in a non cheesy, gritty way that sometimes people mean when they say comics are mature. It's deep, it's emotional. And really it's about fatherhood primarily. And that's like foot forward. That's what it's about. And I think that there's a place for that in comics, which is really, really something special. And I recommend Maze Book. The difficulty with talking about Maze Book, and I'm sure you're going to experience this too, is that so much of Maze Book I really do not want to talk about, because the twists and turns, both literally and figuratively, that the story takes are something that I think it's really, really rewarding to a reader to get through with surprise and then to revisit. Because I think things build in Maze Book in such a way that when you see the intent that went into it from the beginning and the path that was always there, it's very rewarding.
Right. And Maze Book is a must-be-read series that we definitely plan to talk about. We were hoping to try and do it earlier this year, but, life took over and we all had things to do. Our colleague April is going to join in with us as well, because I believe she already has the trade paperback. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Jeff Lemire's story is also another reason why I personally want to recommend his work, is because they're very visual.
Yes.
A lot of his stories are not extremely dialogue driven.
That's true.
It's really, even when it's not his art. I mean, you actually said something great, which I'm really glad you did. You talked about great teams of writers and artists. And if you want to talk about Jeff Lemire, when he teams up with Justin Nguyen,
yes,
we're going to talk about that, because 2 of our favorite pieces of Jeff Lemire's work are actually done by Lemire and Nguyen in a great way.
Yeah.
But
now I'm glad I said that. That was not my intent, but that's incredibly true.
Yes,
how they
absolutely.
work together.
Don't you love it when a plan comes together? But yeah, it's a great story about fatherhood. It's also about accepting loss, which is something that is never easy for a father to do. But, I definitely have to talk about one specific moment in that book that I absolutely adored. It's just the scene, I believe it's at the end of issue 3. It might be the end of issue 4, when he finally finds the maze to
Yeah.
find his
Okay.
daughter, and there's a dog waiting for him, and then the dog actually talks to him and said, "What took you so long?"
Yeah.
When that happened, I was like, well, that was very unexpected. I kind of love
The
that.
story has taken on a different tone.
Yeah. I just love the happy marriage that the story and his artwork really combine together
Mhm.
to, like you said, really produce a true labor of love. I
Mhm.
really, you know, we are fortunate enough to go to a local comic store that has signings. As a matter of fact, we're actually
Yeah.
going to a signing right after we record this video. And I'm hoping that one day Jeff Lemire will be one of the people that comes, because there are many comic book writers and artists that I would just love to shake their hand, say it's so great to have met you. But there are some that I really want to get inside their head and just really ask
Yeah.
them some excellent questions like, how did you come up with this
Yeah.
idea? Jeff Lemire is just one of those guys whose work is so thought-provoking.
Mhm.
You just want to sit down with him like over a couple of drinks and just
Yeah.
ask him those
And talk.
questions.
Because there are similar themes in his work, and I know that we'll get into that as we talk about more of the things that he's written. But I think one of the other things we're going to talk about, a couple of things we're going to talk about, are going to indicate fatherhood is a very important theme to him that comes up multiple times, all the time. The darkness of introspection, but overcoming a past, is a theme in a lot of his work. Duality is a theme, in his life's work. It's funny we start by talking about silver coin, because I'm thinking like two sides of a coin when I say that. But yeah, you're right. He's one. There are people who I want to meet, exactly like you said, to shake their hand and thank them for the fun I've had engaging with their work. And then there's people who I think, I'd really love to hear you just talk for a little bit, because I understand, or think I understand, so much about him from what he chooses to put pen to paper. But I know as an artist myself, you don't always write yourself. You write the things that matter to you and are interesting to you. And I'd love to know a little bit more of Jeff Lemire, the person, for the reason of the interesting stuff he creates. I completely agree.
I mean, one of those creators that I would just like say, get up there and shake your hand. That's a guy like Rob Liefeld.
I knew that. Like, I swear to God, I knew that's who you were going to say.
I would just shake his hand and say, dude,
thank you.
Awesome. That's all.
That's all you really got.
That's all you really need to say to Rob Liefeld. That's true.
Yeah. Hope you have a great day. Thanks for all the work. That's all you really want.
Because he's the guy that would say no problem.
Yeah, exactly.
It. Exactly. That's just the type of guy that he is.
Yeah.
Sorry for constantly hitting that.
Doesn't matter.
So then we got on to another piece of Jeff Lemire's work that came out, and that was really when all of a sudden I'm noticing, the companies that he's working for really seem to want him to write more. I mean, this was a dark horse thing that Maze Book was, but then Image Comics gave us a 5-issue miniseries called Primordial, which I'm pretty certain you did not
I haven't read Primordial, no. That's one of the ones that's not me.
So Primordial, when I want to find out what makes a good story that's coming out, if I want to spend my money on it, I want to find out what it's all about. So thank God I have a lot of resources where I can actually look at the blurbs and say, okay, this sounds like something very interesting. So when I was officially on a Jeff Lemire kick, Primordial is on the way, and I'm like, what is this all about? And it basically is the story of chimps that were sent into space, and then they were but around the time of the space race in the 1950s and 60s, and then they finally find the apes. But the question is, what did they come back with? And I basically said to myself, wow, this has like 2001 Space Odyssey vibes. And the funniest part about that is I hate that movie. I do not like that movie at all. It is one of the biggest snooze fests I ever experienced, but that's also because of the fact that I know that I get under so many people's skin when I say I am not the biggest fan of Stanley Kubrick. But Primordial definitely had that Kubrick feel to it, but it had something additional. And again, I think it was just because of the fact that the story was not dialogue driven. It was very image driven and visual, and it was gorgeous. Like, it was such a simple story, yet it definitely was supposed to be a complex story. But because of the fact that the dialogue was so minimal, and it really was about the writer telling you, open the book and just look at it. Just experience the entirety of what you're reading. even if you're not reading much. I have been trying to tell you that this is something that really you should read.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if there were some copies left at our local store.
By the way, I'm going to jump in just because this is one that, since I haven't read, I can't comment on the story itself. I'm going to comment very briefly on one that I'm relatively sure you haven't read, and correct me if I'm wrong, but just what you're talking about there of visual first, kind of engaging with the moment and seeing what you're seeing. One of the things I've read from him is Thanos Returns. Have you read Thanos Returns?
I have not read his piece.
Okay.
I read Donny Cates's Thanos Wins.
Right. So I've also read that. But so Thanos Returns, I think, has a lot of moments of what you're talking about that probably he got to run with a lot more in Primordial. But talking about that kind of aspect of how Jeff Lemire likes to write by showing, not telling a lot of ways, I think Thanos Returns does a really great job with that. And what a character to choose to center, to write for that kind of storytelling, because it gives Thanos the ability to really show off the terror and the power of Thanos, right? The wordless walking in and blowing up an entire city, and it's just like 3 panels of silence except for the boom onomatopoeia. You know what I mean? And it works, and that's what you expect from the character, but it makes perfect sense that it's Jeff Lemire. This is the Thanos story he wants to tell. The kind of like dramatic return, tableau scenes, moments of it. And yes, there's deep introspection. We explore the character. We look at some of his key relationships, both with the Black Order and with Death, and with others that I will not spoil for people who have not read the strip yet. But I figured that was a good time for me to point that one out, because I see a commonality in the kind of style of storytelling that you're talking about.
Well, I am really glad that you mentioned that run, because that was something I completely forgot about. And why is that? It's because of the fact that when you take a look at that entire Thanos run, nobody remembers Jeff Lemire's piece. Everybody just remembers issues 13 through 18, because that's when Donny Cates came in.
And it is phenomenal. Let me be very clear. I think Thanos Wins is phenomenal, and Donny Cates is Donny Cates.
Yes.
So it is phenomenal, but it does overshadow that Jeff Lemire was involved in the lead up to that.
But it's because of the fact that Jeff Lemire didn't bring us Cosmic Ghost Rider. Jeff Lemire didn't bring us Silver Surfer Black. So it's like everyone completely forgets that he's part of that specific Thanos run. And it's sad.
Right. But anyway, that's one I wanted to bring up, because again, as is evidenced by Primordial, there are different lenses into Jeff Lemire's writing here. So just wanted to highlight one that I was pretty sure you hadn't read.
Right.
So
yeah, it's just kind of funny how I actually did read the
follow-up. And you're not alone. There are many people who are like that. And I actually read Thanos Wins before I read Thanos Returns, for the very reason. Donny Cates writing Thanos, a great Thanos story. I read it. I enjoyed it. I wanted more. And then
I'm just curious. Have you read Silver Surfer Black, by the way?
I have not. No.
Well, I will just say, if you want, I would, even though Jeff Lemire is not connected to Silver Surfer Black in any way, if you want to see some beautiful trippy artwork, that's where Silver Surfer Black is. But speaking of some more mainstream titles, then Jeff Lemire actually was told to DC, come back and we want to give you a specific project, you and Justin Wynn. And before we get into that, we're going to talk about something that's actually very important to mention, because we're going to be talking about Jeff Lemire's story that Andy and I actually think may be the greatest Batman story ever told. But we have to take this time right now to remember the fact that we lost a towering icon. We lost the true Dark Knight just a few days ago. Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman, tragically passed away, lost his battle with cancer at the age of 66. The fact that this hit people who are fans just as hard as when Chadwick Boseman passed away, because like Chadwick Boseman, he didn't tell anybody that he was suffering. And he is, when you ask people like who was the greatest representation of Batman, almost everyone says it's Kevin Conroy.
Kevin Conroy is Batman. Other people are portraying a role. And yeah, so at the time of recording this, it's been about 48 hours since that news. You know, we just recorded our Batman animated series episode together, was the last thing we filmed.
That's correct.
So, you know, we're sitting here now. That was obviously not on our minds at the time that that episode went out. And it's a huge loss to comics fans, to animation, to game fans, to Batman fans. Just his contributions to the Batman character are immeasurable. I really mean it. Kevin Conroy is Batman. Everybody else is portraying a role that is what he did and embodied. Kevin Conroy is the greatest Batman.
I will agree with you 100%. So Robin and Batman.
Yes.
Jeff Lemire and Justin Nguyen, a 3-issue miniseries that should have been longer, but
blew my mind. Wonderful, wonderful miniseries. Wonderful series. Yeah, and again, showing the team and the strength of the team. God, they knock it out of the park.
But you know something? When anyone gets the chance to be told, we want you to write a Batman story, you know, that's got comic book fans and Batman fans specifically on pins and needles, because it's like, what is going to happen?
Yeah.
Because think about all the Batman comics that are coming out right now, and think of some of the up-and-coming legends and the current legends that are writing Batman stories right now. We've got Chip Zdarsky writing the current Batman run, and I gotta say, it is great. We've got Ram V writing Detective Comics, and he's brought the Gothic back to Batman, which I think has been missing from Batman for such a long time. Mark Silvestri, the man, the myth, the legend, is currently starting a fun 7-issue Black Label miniseries called The Deadly Duo. I read the first issue and I freaking loved it. It was just fun.
Nice.
And there are so many other things right now that are linked to Batman. I mean, don't even get me started on how excited I am for December 13th when Todd McFarlane and Greg Capullo are going to be writing Batman versus Spawn. Like, holy cow. Like, I am excited. But I don't think any of them are going to hold a candle to Robin and Batman.
No.
Because it's such a human story. I mean, I love the fact, first and foremost, that it really focuses on Robin's view of Batman when he's first becoming the Boy Wonder.
Yeah.
I love how we even, and I wouldn't even consider it like retconning, because there were so many people that had issues with the whole story with Killer Croc. I mean, the truth of the matter is, why would you not do that? I think it makes more sense than you think. I mean, we all know how Robin got his start. We know that before he became Robin, he was Dick Grayson, the son of the parents of the Flying Graysons at the Healy Circus, and we all know what happened there and how he was found by Bruce Wayne. But how could you not expect Killer Croc to be in that circus? Yeah, you know,
it makes a lot of sense. It does. And yeah, I think that the reaction to it, like a retcon, a little much, doesn't matter, because what the story is wonderful and natural. And going to what you said about all these great writers being brought in to take their spin at Batman, right? You got to imagine that when you get tapped to do Batman, and it's the first time, you know, you get this chance to do this with the characters, everybody has to ask themselves, what am I going to do that hasn't been done before? Or what am I going to do that's going to like actually leave my thumbprint on this?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. The person who definitely left his mark was Garth Ennis, because that story, Batman Reptilian, whoa, what was that?
I don't know.
I mean, I will say Liam Sharp's art was incredible.
Was great.
That was the reason why I had to keep reading it.
Worth the price of admission.
But yikes.
But yeah, but I think everybody thinks, what am I going to do that's going to bring something to the table that will turn heads, that'll fit with the character, that'll be a good story, that'll get people interested. And I think centering Robin in the way that he did was wonderful. And this goes back to the themes of fatherhood that I see Jeff Lemire exploring in so much of the work that I've read from him. I think getting to see that growing relationship between Robin and Batman, and the duality of the competing forces of Bruce wanting to protect Dick from a certain way of life, but at the same time, I mean, the ending of issue 2, just completely, it's that issue. It's one of the biggest gut punches in comics I've ever experienced.
I was like, oh my God, when I was flipping through those pages, when I got to the end, I was like, my exact reaction was, no.
I know.
Oh no, you didn't.
I know. And you see, and it's not just a surprise, because like I said, it's the push and pull, it's the duality, it's the Bruce is protecting Dick from this life. He genuinely does have care for Dick that comes across in the whole story, and especially the entire trajectory of it. But in that moment, you see there is still the other side of the coin, which is he really is building this boy up to protect him and build his skills, but in the way that Batman knows how, which, as you know, Alfred will point out, is maybe not the healthiest. It's a wonderful story. Yeah, issue 2 in particular.
I would recommend this to, and the thing I love so much about it, and I'm pretty sure I said this exact same thing when we did our character profiles on Robin, you really don't need to catch up on any of the Batman mythos. No. Just read these 3 issues, buy that paperback and read it, and just read it on its own.
And it's an early
tale.
It's a great standout. It's an early tale. It's one of those things where, like with anything comics, it's enriched by what you know and your background, and things grow and they mean more to you. But if you want to talk entry points,
yes,
I think Robin and Batman is an absolutely phenomenal entry point. I think issue 2 might hit a little bit harder if you've got some background with the characters, but I don't think that takes away anything, because really the themes we're looking at are universal.
Right. And the artwork. We have to talk about the artwork on there, because what I love so much about Justin Wynn is the fact that he sort of does like a watercolor effect.
Yes.
And what I loved so much about that specific story was how he still managed to make it so bright and vibrant. I mean, we go back to the second issue, because that one's got the most color in it. When you see those scenes with the Titans, like, it's just beautiful to look at. I mean, I was like saying to myself, I don't think I've seen anything more singular or something so unique since Alex Ross's work on anything that he's done.
Yeah, and you know that Wynn loved doing it because of Robin, because the red stands out. Oh, for sure, and you can tell the joy in every depiction of Robin, specifically in red, when we get to do that.
So at this point in time, you know, these were pretty much the things that gave Jeff Lemire the big announcement. And that was the fact that he officially has signed a contract with Image Comics.
Yeah.
And right now he's got 2 incredible projects in the works. One of them is also teaming up with Justin Wynn, and that's it. We've basically got right now, and I know there's more coming, and I'm really excited to see what he's got down the pipe, but right now he has well enveloped us in the world of Little Monsters and the Bone Orchard mythos. So I know that we are both reading Little Monsters.
Yeah.
You're not reading the Bone Orchard.
Not reading Bone Orchard. And not necessarily that I won't, but you're correct. I'm not currently reading it. If you want to talk about Bone Orchard first, that's fine, because I think we should talk about Little Monsters.
Well, the good news is it's not that hard to get into right now, because of the fact that you could probably still get your hands on the Bone Orchard Mythos prelude from Free Comic Book Day. And then there's the hardcover of the Passage. And now there's going to be a 5-issue series called 10,000 Black Feathers. We've already gotten the first 2 issues. Here's how I'm going to explain it. I can't. I can't, because it's just fun. So... Oh, I just gotta say, I can't explain it. Just read the damn stuff, because it's just so creepy and atmospheric and out there. And I'm just like, I don't know what the hell is going on.
I did read
but I want to read more.
I did read the Free Comic Book Day tie-in, because that one I picked up just because, you know, it's Jeff Lemire. So I needed to get it, even though I haven't been doing Bone Orchard. I needed to pick it up.
Out there and weird. And
it was disconcerting. And I can only talk about the one, you know, preview from Free Comic Book Day, but it was deeply disconcerting.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, you want to talk about him really getting into the world of horror? Holy cow. That's where he's really diving deep into the horror. The images, the story, it's just whoa. Like I said, I can't explain it.
Yeah.
And there are so many people that are trying to say, well, where are we going with this? I'm just like, who cares? Just read the damn damn thing and we'll find out. If you love Jeff Lemire, is he really going to disappoint you right now? Because if there's one thing that I know that so many great writers are doing right now is they're giving us good stories, but they're not sticking the landing as often as you would like to. I mean, we talked about Donny Cates. You know, he basically gave us the King in Black, but that main story of the King in Black, that ultimate crossover, the landing didn't stick so great.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just because of the fact that there was just so much to it, and maybe it was just because of the fact that there were so many tie-in issues, but no, that one did not hit the mark. So not every great writer is perfect, but Jeff Lemire is still one of those writers out there that has yet to disappoint me. And I mean, Little Monsters, it's like Rugrats are vampires. That's basically what it is to me.
Yeah, I can see that comparison. Little Monsters is, so I guess pretty much everyone we've talked about, you know, I have to first hit the theme, fatherhood, or at the very least, parenting, major theme in Little Monsters. It's got literal light dark duality this time in Little Monsters. And it's got that, I wouldn't call Little Monsters a horror book by any means, but it shows his horror pedigree. Because it's got the vampires. But even more than that, there's something, it feels to me like we're using the aesthetics of horror tropes. You know, we've got the feral children, we've got the post-apocalyptic world. You know, we've got the mystery, the unnamed, like, old ones. You know, we got all that stuff. We've got the aesthetics of horror, but at the end of the day, you know, vampire Rugrats. At the end of the day, what we're talking about is a character story about these kids that you slowly get to learn more and more about each individual one of them and care about them and what happens to them. So I am a huge fan of Little Monsters. I think it plays to his strengths and in a very different way than May's book. I think Little Monsters, again, feels like the kind of story that you probably only make when you really want to make that story. Little Monsters is not something that was baked in a boardroom to sell books. It's working because it's done really, really well, and Jeff Lemire and Wynn are a great team.
Yeah, and I also love that it's not as colorful. It's very black and white.
Very black and white.
But it still captures that atmosphere.
It also makes the color that does happen very impactful.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Which was clearly by design.
Of course.
But yeah, Little Monsters is, again, it's that work of, this is what they wanted to make. It was birthed whole. They're doing a great story. It's successful in that it's successful on its merits, but it was not baked in a boardroom. That's a story that was brought to Image. You know, it was like, this is what we want to do. And I'm really happy they were able to do it.
Yeah, I think one of the few things that really stands out about that story is that, yes, there are children in this world and they are vampires, but the one thing that Jeff Lemire does so beautifully is how he captures the innocence of these kids, because these kids may be vampires, but you can tell that they are not those typical bloodthirsty vampires that you would see in those cheesy horror movies that are basically like hunting through the night to find humans to get blood. No, these kids are not trying to do that. What they're trying to do is they're trying to figure out, why are they in this world? Why have they been abandoned? And how are we going to live our lives? And unfortunately, when they do come across humans, it's not that they become bloodthirsty monsters. They actually question the reasoning as to why, which is why I really appreciate the depth of these young kids. And they're like, should I devour this human or shouldn't I?
Yeah, and the question of the rule of not leaving the city, is it to protect the kids or to protect the humans? You know, and then they come into direct conflict over that, obviously. But yeah, Little Monsters, very, very good story, hitting on the same themes that we've been talking about, but from a different direction. And I think Little Monsters is a good one to point out, because if you've made it this far in the episode, you clearly have some interest in Jeff Lemire. But if for some reason you don't, I think Little Monsters is a really interesting way into him. I think Robin and Batman's probably the most accessible of the stuff we might be talking about. But I think that Little Monsters, if Robin and Bat, you know, if you want something a little off the beaten path, if you don't really want a superhero story, even though there's more to Robin and Batman than a superhero story, I think Little Monsters is one of those, you know, like indie without being art house, unique stories that would really pull someone in.
Well, what I really am excited about this one in particular is because even though we're still very much fresh into the story, the second story arc literally just started. What I really appreciated about this one is that this is my very first Jeff Lemire ongoing series.
Yeah.
It's not one of his miniseries. And one of the few things I'm definitely noticing about this specific story is that it is not a sprint. It is definitely a marathon. I can tell through the writing that Jeff Lemire's got a game plan here.
Yeah.
He has the whole story in his head. He knows where it's going to go. It's just a matter of how are we going to get from point A to point B. And one of the few things that I am just seeing right now is that the most positive thing about this story is, as far as I'm concerned, it's not dragging. There are no points that don't keep you interested in this story. There's no points where you just want to throw the book aside and say, this is boring, I want to go read something else. No. This story is still atmospheric. It's still very captivating. And now we're really getting into a very interesting part of the story because we're starting to learn a little bit about the old ones. We're going into the pasts of some of these characters. So I am really curious to see where this second story arc is going to go. And I'm really excited to see where this story goes in general.
May I speak briefly about another one that I'm relatively sure you haven't read?
Sure.
We hinted at this earlier. Jeff Lemire had the reins on Moon Knight before Max Bemis, and I have read those. Very briefly, I just want to touch on this because you were just talking about how, you know, mostly it was like the mini series, not getting to see the long term. So he did write Moon Knight for a year, a little over. He had a pretty good run on Moon Knight.
That's good.
And the little bit I will say about it is, if you were a fan of the Disney Plus series, specifically the end, where things started to get a little funkier, I think you would be a big fan of Jeff Lemire's take on Moon Knight. You will not be shocked that kind of the underlying darkness in the character, the violence in the character is something that really lands well in Jeff Lemire's wheelhouse. He really likes to play with identity, which is, Moon Knight is a great lane for that, in the same way he does with his other stories. The mistaken identity, the confused identity, the darkness and the light within. I think Moon Knight is a great story. And so, like I said, in broad strokes, if you enjoyed particularly the later parts of the Disney Plus series, where things started to get a little funky, I think you will really like the kind of nebulous take on who Mark Spector is and the situation he finds himself in, particularly at the beginning of Jeff Lemire's run on Moon Knight. But I just wanted to point that one out specifically.
But as far as I'm concerned, Jeff Lemire is truly making a name for himself. Particularly, it's kind of interesting how it's literally been in the last 2 to 3 years.
Yeah,
that's what's pretty crazy.
Yeah, because Moon Knight was, I think that was like 2016 he was writing that, maybe earlier, but that's now a little further back.
He's got me so interested in his work now. Will I read some of his older stuff? I'm not sure, because everybody says to me, oh, if you love Jeff Lemire, you've got to read Gideon Falls. That's the one that almost everyone and their mother and their cousin twice removed is telling me I need to read. But I'm just really excited to see where his current work is going to go. And I'm really curious to see what he's going to continue to do for Image with this contract.
Yeah. Also, just, you know, talking about the originality he's been bringing to the newer things. Nevertheless, I do, before we move on from the old one, ask, did you read his Century? Like, he did like a 6-issue. It's like
I heard about that one. I have not.
Okay, I really liked it. But again, we're talking about you know, but the old, comparatively older works at this point now. But I did want to mention that one briefly. I thought Century was very well done.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I really don't know what else we could possibly say. All I'm going to say is that Jeff Lemire is definitely one of the best writers out there right now, you know, especially in a world where people are really fed up with the big two, myself included, unfortunately. Don't even get me started on what I thought about the latest crossover from X-Men. But no, Jeff Lemire is fresh, he's interesting, and everything that he brings to the table has just got filled with intrigue and wonderment and and whimsy. That's what I love so much about his work.
And he's an important leg potentially on that Image train, as things have really been looking good for Image, the creativity that they've been having, the kind of talent that they've been bringing in, and kind of taking the training wheels off and letting people do, you know, the stories they want to tell, the exciting stuff that's coming out of Image. I think we should expect to continue to see Jeff Lemire be a big name from them in particular. Very excited for what the future holds for him.
Well, that's going to wrap up another episode of Creators Notes, everybody. We really hope you enjoyed, and I'm always willing and excited to work on things with Andy, and we are hoping we'll get at least 1 or 2 more things done this year. I know we have some interesting things down the pike, but until then, everybody, we will see you in the next one.
Thanks, everyone.